50,000 people forcibly removed. Foreign criminals deported at rates we haven't seen in a decade. And today, the UK government just dropped the most aggressive immigration enforcement package in modern British history. Article 8 of the Human Rights Convention, the legal shield that's protected thousands from deportation, is being stripped away. Appeal systems dismantled, asylum accommodations gutted, and entire countries facing visa bans if they refuse to cooperate. What was announced today will change everything about UK immigration, and it affects way more people than you think. Welcome back to GoUKGo, where we break down the political decisions that actually impact your life, cutting through the noise to give you the real story. I'm diving deep into today's immigration announcement from Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. And I need to tell you, the scale of what's being proposed here is genuinely unprecedented. Whether you believe this represents necessary enforcement or authoritarian overreach probably depends on where you stand politically. But here's what nobody can deny. These reforms will fundamentally restructure how immigration enforcement operates in the United Kingdom, affecting not just undocumented migrants, but legal visa holders, asylum seekers, and potentially even British citizens with foreign-born family members. Make sure you hit that like button right now, because what I'm about to explain represents breaking developments that the mainstream media is either oversimplifying or completely missing the implications of. The devil is absolutely in the details here, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly who's affected, what legal battles are coming, and why experts are calling this the most significant shift in UK immigration policy in decades. 50,000 people forcibly removed. Foreign criminals deported at rates we haven't seen in a decade. And today, the UK government just dropped the most aggressive immigration enforcement package in modern British history. Article 8 of the Human Rights Convention, the legal shield that's protected thousands from deportation, is being stripped away. Appeal systems dismantled. Asylum accommodations gutted. And entire countries facing visa bans if they refuse to cooperate. What was announced today will change everything about UK immigration, and it affects way more people than you think. Let's establish the foundation by examining the numbers that the Home Office is celebrating today, because these statistics provide crucial context for understanding why such dramatic new measures are being introduced in the first place. Since the Labour government assumed power in July 2024, more than 50,000 individuals have been removed from British territory. Now, that figure encompasses multiple categories: undocumented migrants who entered illegally, asylum seekers whose claims were rejected, individuals who overstayed their visas, and foreign nationals convicted of crimes. But here's where the data becomes particularly revealing. Of those 50,000 removals, 15,200 were classified as forced deportations. We're not talking about people who voluntarily agreed to return home. We're not discussing individuals who accepted financial incentives to leave. These are forced removals, meaning border force officers physically detained these individuals, escorted them onto aircraft, and sent them back to their countries of origin against their explicit wishes. That figure represents a 45% increase compared to what the previous Conservative government managed to achieve during an equivalent 19-month period before Labour took office. Think about the irony here for a moment. The Conservatives spent years positioning themselves as the party of tough immigration enforcement. They proposed the controversial Rwanda deportation scheme. They passed multiple pieces of immigration legislation. They gave fiery speeches about taking back control of Britain's borders. Yet despite all that rhetoric, Labour is actually removing more people, more quickly, and with significantly less public controversy or media circus surrounding each deportation. When we narrow our focus specifically to foreign national offenders, meaning individuals convicted of criminal offenses in the UK who lack British citizenship, the deportation increase becomes even more dramatic at 32%. Over 8,700 foreign criminals have been removed since Keir Starmer's government assumed office. We're talking about individuals convicted of murder, rape, violent assault, drug trafficking, and other serious criminal offenses committed on British soil, who are now being sent back to their home countries. The Border Security, Asylum, and Immigration Act of 2025 provided law enforcement with significantly expanded powers to detain and deport foreign criminals, And the data clearly demonstrates these powers are being utilized far more aggressively than under previous administrations. But despite achieving these record-breaking deportation numbers, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper stood before Parliament today and essentially declared that these figures aren't sufficient. The government, in her words, must go further to remove those who have no legal right to remain in this country. So what exactly is coming next? This is where the announcements become genuinely dramatic and potentially constitutionally controversial. New legislation is being introduced this year, and we're talking about implementation in 2026, meaning these changes are imminent. This legislation will fundamentally transform how deportation appeals function in the British legal system. Under the current framework, when someone receives a deportation order, they possess the right to appeal that decision. If they lose that initial appeal, they can file a second appeal based on different legal grounds. If that second appeal fails, they might qualify to apply for judicial review in the higher courts. This process can stretch on for years, sometimes even a decade or more, during which time the person subject to deportation remains on UK territory, potentially working illegally in the underground economy, potentially committing additional criminal offenses, and definitely costing British taxpayers substantial sums in legal aid funding, accommodation expenses, and administrative processing. The revolutionary new system being proposed is termed a one-stop-shop appeals process. You receive one appeal, one single opportunity to present your case and argue why you shouldn't be deported. If you lose that appeal, the matter is concluded. No additional appeals on alternative grounds. No endless legal battles that stretch across years. Immediate removal from the United Kingdom with no further recourse to British courts. But here's where the government is deploying what can only be described as a nuclear option, an approach that will trigger massive legal challenges from human rights organizations and immigration lawyers across the country. The government is introducing legislation specifically designed to prevent undocumented migrants from utilizing Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights to block their deportation. Article 8 protects the right to respect for private and family life, and for years, individuals facing deportation have successfully argued in British courts that removing them would violate this fundamental right. Their arguments typically follow this pattern. I've resided in the UK for 10 years. My children were born here and attend British schools. My partner is a British citizen. My entire life is integrated into British society. Removing me would destroy my family unit and violate my right to family life under Article 8. And here's the critical detail. Courts have frequently agreed with these arguments, blocking deportations on Article 8 grounds in thousands of cases. The new legislation will essentially declare that if you're residing in the UK illegally, Article 8 protections no longer apply to your situation. Your family ties, regardless of how deep they run. Your length of residence, regardless of how many years you've been here. Your integration into British society, regardless of how complete. None of it will matter in the eyes of the law. You're here illegally, therefore you're being removed, and human rights protections won't provide a shield against deportation. Now, I need to be absolutely clear about something. This legislation will face immediate legal challenges the moment it's introduced. Human rights lawyers will undoubtedly argue that this violates the UK's international obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. There will be legal battles that could potentially extend for years through various levels of British and potentially European courts. But the mere fact that the government is willing to propose such legislation reveals just how aggressive their approach has become toward immigration enforcement. But the announcements don't stop there. The intensity actually increases when we examine what the government is planning regarding countries that refuse to cooperate with UK deportation efforts. If you're a citizen of a country that the UK government considers safe for returns, and that country refuses to accept back its own citizens who are being deported from Britain, the UK will impose visa sanctions on that entire nation. Let me explain what this means in practical terms that will affect millions of people who have nothing to do with immigration violations. Let's create a hypothetical scenario. Country X refuses to accept back criminals or failed asylum seekers who are being deported from the United Kingdom. The UK could respond by implementing policies that make it significantly more difficult for all citizens of Country X to obtain UK visas. This wouldn't just affect criminals or immigration violators. We're talking about tourists wanting to visit London, students hoping to study at British universities, skilled workers seeking employment opportunities, business people trying to attend conferences. Every single citizen of country X could face rejection or additional scrutiny on their visa applications. You could be a completely legitimate business professional who has never violated any law in your entire life, but because your government refuses to cooperate with UK deportation policies, your visa application gets denied or subjected to extreme additional vetting requirements. This represents collective punishment on a national scale, and it's absolutely going to create serious diplomatic tensions with countries that don't want to accept back individuals they consider problematic or who have committed crimes abroad. Some countries genuinely don't want their criminals returned because it creates domestic security issues. Other countries may lack the administrative capacity to process deportees efficiently. Regardless of the reasons, the UK is essentially saying, cooperate with our deportations or your entire population faces visa restrictions. Before I continue breaking down the asylum accommodation changes and cost-cutting measures, I need you to do something critical right now. Subscribe to GoUKGo and smash that notification bell, because these immigration reforms aren't being rolled out all at once. They're being introduced in stages throughout 2026, and you absolutely need to stay updated on exactly what's being implemented and when these changes take effect. Drop a comment as well. I genuinely want to know what you think. Do you believe these measures represent necessary law enforcement, or has the government crossed a line into excessive authoritarianism? Your perspective matters, so share it in the comments. Now let's discuss asylum accommodation costs, because the government is making substantial claims about taxpayer savings. Under the previous Conservative government, approximately 400 hotels across the United Kingdom were being utilized to house asylum seekers while they waited for their claims to be processed through the system. The cost of this hotel accommodation system was staggering: £9 million per day. Every single day, British taxpayers were funding £9 million for hotel accommodation. Labour has reduced that number to just under 200 hotels, achieving savings of over £74 million thus far. But they're not stopping there. Starting this week, asylum seekers living in hotel accommodation are banned from using taxis for medical appointments. They'll use public transportation or walk to their appointments. Now, this might sound like a trivial policy detail. Who really cares about taxi fares when we're discussing massive immigration reforms? But symbolically, this policy shift is extremely significant. The message being sent is crystal clear. Asylum accommodation is being made as basic and uncomfortable as possible to deter people from attempting to come to the UK in the first place. Hotels are being systematically replaced with military sites and other basic accommodation facilities. Think former military barracks, prefabricated housing units, shared facilities with minimal privacy, institutional settings that prioritize function over comfort. The underlying theory is straightforward. If potential migrants in France or Belgium know they'll be housed in uncomfortable institutional settings rather than hotels, they'll be less likely to pay smugglers thousands of euros to attempt the dangerous channel crossing. Critics argue this approach is fundamentally inhumane, that asylum seekers deserve dignity and decent treatment regardless of how they arrived in the country. Supporters counter that British taxpayers shouldn't be funding comfortable hotel accommodation for people who entered the country through illegal means. The political debate is heated and polarized, but the policy is being implemented regardless of public opinion. There's also a massive enforcement crackdown targeting illegal working. The year 2025 set the record as the highest year ever for illegal working enforcement. 9,000 arrests were made for illegal working violations. 12,800 raids were conducted on businesses suspected of employing undocumented workers. That represents a 60% and 58% increase, respectively, compared to 2024 figures. New measures that came into force just this week have criminalized online posts advertising small boat crossing services. If you're operating a Facebook group or Telegram channel where you advertise or facilitate channel crossings, that activity is now a criminal offense carrying serious penalties, including potential imprisonment. The government's strategy is attempting to disrupt the entire business model of people smuggling gangs by severing their advertising and recruitment channels. There's also new legislation banning foreign sex offenders from claiming refugee protections in the UK. If you've been convicted of sexual offenses in another country, you categorically cannot claim asylum in the United Kingdom on grounds that you would face persecution if returned home. Your criminal record automatically disqualifies you from protection, regardless of your individual circumstances. Additionally, legislation introduced this week makes it a specific criminal offense to produce or sell fraudulent immigration documents or to facilitate illegal channel crossings. Now, these activities were already illegal in practice under existing laws, but the new legislation increases penalties substantially and provides law enforcement with enhanced powers to investigate and prosecute these offenses more aggressively. One particularly revealing statistic buried in the Home Office report deserves attention. Voluntary removals have increased by 27%, but enforced removals have surged by 45%. That gap between those two numbers tells you something extremely important about what's actually happening on the ground. More people are being forcibly removed than are choosing to leave voluntarily. The government is having to deploy detention facilities and force deportation because individuals aren't departing voluntarily even after their asylum claims have been rejected through the legal system. That statistical gap suggests one of two scenarios. Either people are genuinely desperate with nowhere safe to return to, or they're gambling that they can remain in the UK indefinitely by fighting through endless appeals and exploiting legal loopholes in the system. The new one-stop appeals process is specifically engineered to eliminate that second option entirely. There's also this claim from Prisons Minister James Timpson that foreign criminals are creating severe overcrowding in British jails, and removing them will free up desperately needed prison space. He's absolutely correct that British prisons are facing catastrophic overcrowding at crisis levels. However, critics point out that deporting foreign criminals doesn't actually address the root causes of crime or prison overcrowding in British society. It simply exports the problem to other countries while creating the illusion of a solution. The Sentencing Act is being amended so foreign nationals no longer need to serve a minimum portion of their criminal sentence in UK prisons before becoming eligible for deportation. Currently, if you receive a 5-year sentence, you might serve half that time in a British prison before qualifying for deportation consideration. The new law will permit immediate deportation upon sentencing, even if you haven't served a single day in a British prison. This will apply retroactively to individuals already in custody, which means foreign nationals currently serving sentences could suddenly be deported without warning, potentially within days of the law taking effect. Now let's address the elephant in the room that mainstream media isn't discussing. How much of what was announced today actually represents genuinely new policy versus repackaged announcements of things already in progress? Some of these measures were already underway before today's announcement. The Border Security Act was passed into law in 2025. Deportation numbers have been climbing steadily for months. So today's announcement represents partially the Home Secretary taking political credit for enforcement increases already happening, and partially announcing genuinely new legislation that will be introduced later this year. The authentically new elements are the one-stop appeals process, the Article 8 restrictions preventing human rights claims, and the visa sanction threats against non-cooperative countries. Those represent significant policy shifts that will require new primary legislation to be passed through Parliament. The rest of the announcement, increased deportations, hotel closures, illegal working raids, those are enforcement increases rather than fundamental policy changes. They're important and they're having real impacts, but they're not revolutionary in terms of legal framework. Let me quickly synthesize everything that was announced today so you have a complete picture. 50,000 removals accomplished in just 19 months, including 15,000 forced deportations. Foreign criminal deportations increased by 32%. A new one-stop appeal system designed to end years of legal battles. Article 8, human rights protections being stripped away from undocumented migrants. Visa sanctions threatened against any countries that refuse to cooperate with deportations. Asylum hotel costs slashed by replacing hotels with military sites and basic accommodation. Taxi bans implemented for asylum seekers attending medical appointments. Illegal working enforcement reaching record levels with thousands of arrests. and foreign criminals to be deported immediately upon sentencing without serving any time in UK prisons. This represents the most aggressive immigration enforcement package any British government has announced in decades. Whether it's legally sound, whether it's humane, whether it will actually achieve its stated objectives, those are all open questions that will be debated in Parliament, litigated in courts, and argued in public discourse for years to come. But the government's intent is absolutely crystal clear. Labour wants to be perceived as tougher on illegal immigration than the Conservatives ever managed to be, and they're supporting that positioning with deportation statistics and policy proposals that go considerably further than anything the Tories actually implemented during their 14 years in power. The devil is absolutely in the details here, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly who's affected, what legal battles are coming, and why experts are calling this the most significant shift in UK immigration policy in decades. 50,000 people forcibly removed, foreign criminals deported at rates we haven't seen in a decade. And today, the UK government just dropped the most aggressive immigration enforcement package in modern British history. Article 8 of the Human Rights Convention, the legal shield that's protected thousands from deportation, is being stripped away. Appeal systems dismantled. Asylum accommodations gutted. And entire countries facing visa bans if they refuse to cooperate. What was announced today will change everything about UK immigration, and it affects way more people than you think. If this breakdown helped you understand what was actually announced today, beyond the superficial media headlines, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to GoUKGo because these immigration reforms will be implemented in stages throughout 2026, and you need to stay informed about what's changing and when these policies take effect. These aren't abstract political debates. These are policies that will directly affect real people's lives, potentially including people you know. Drop a comment below and let me know your honest thoughts. Are these measures justified enforcement of immigration law? Or has the government gone too far into authoritarian territory? There's no right answer, but the discussion is important. Share this video with anyone affected by UK immigration policy, whether they're asylum seekers, migrants, legal visa holders, or simply anyone interested in British politics and where this country is heading. In my next video, I'm going to break down the specific legal challenges these reforms will inevitably face, analyze which measures are most likely to be blocked or modified by the courts, and explain the realistic timeline for when each element will actually be implemented versus the government's stated intentions. Until then, stay informed, think critically, and remember that immigration enforcement isn't just statistics and policy announcements. These are real human lives being affected by these decisions, families being separated, communities being disrupted, and futures being fundamentally altered. This is GoUKGo, where we break down the politics that matter. I'll see you in the next one. The devil is absolutely in the details here, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly who's affected, what legal battles are coming, and why experts are calling this the most significant shift in UK immigration policy in decades. 50,000 people forcibly removed. Foreign criminals deported at rates we haven't seen in a decade. And today, the UK government just dropped the most aggressive immigration enforcement package in modern British history. Article 8 of the Human Rights Convention, the legal shield that's protected thousands from deportation, is being stripped away. Appeal systems dismantled. Asylum accommodations gutted. And entire countries facing visa bans if they refuse to cooperate. What was announced today will change everything about UK immigration, and it affects way more people than you think.